Let's go over to Canada real quick. So 10 minutes on this. Canada is holding elections, but the majority of the election is focused on Trump.
It's quite extraordinary to see the way that the polls have turned, because only months ago it really was the Conservatives' election to lose. The expectation was that Pierre Poilievre was going to bring his party to victory and that there was no way that the Liberals could turn things around in such a short time frame. But two things seem to have happened. One is that Mark Carney, having taken over as Prime Minister and Liberal leader, has sought to jettison some of the policies of Justin Trudeau, and to do that quite deliberately. And with his experience, obviously, at Goldman Sachs and at central banks, he's seen as a pretty steady hand on the economic tiller at a difficult time, and someone who might be able to help navigate some of the difficult moments that we're in. And also you have the question of the Trump effect, which is that Donald Trump, very aggressively going for Canada on trade, just over the border on migration as well. And certainly you could say fundamentally upending the relationship between the US and Canada. And that's really played into the election campaign. You can.
So let's stop there. I got another video that I want to show you guys really quickly so you guys can get the so much for that idea. So you guys can get the gist of what's happening with this Canadian election. So hold on. Let me see if I can actually find something else really quickly. Because I want to make sure that you guys are informed on what's going on with these elections over in Canada. Let me see if I can find this one. Give me a second.
If you're a woman over 60 and you want to lose weight.
Tomorrow is the end of voting in Canada to elect a new prime minister. The big issue in this campaign has been U.S.-Canadian relations, especially President Trump's tariffs. The two frontrunners are Liberal Party leader and current Prime Minister Mark Carney and Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre. Since the beginning of the year, opinion polls have gone from showing a commanding Conservative Party lead to a narrower but consistent Liberal Party lead. David Frum is a writer for The Atlantic and host of the podcast The David Frum Show. He's a native and part-time resident of Canada. David, more than 20 percentage point swing from the beginning of the year to now. What happened?
Let's talk about first why the Conservatives were so far ahead. Under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Liberals have governed Canada for a decade, since 2015. Economic progress has been disappointing over those 10 years. Productivity growth was slow. Incomes did not rise. The Trudeau strategy for overcoming this poor performance of the economy productively was to invite many more immigrants to come, to make at least the economy bigger. Canada's immigration rates were already high. He effectively doubled it. So Canadians find themselves poor economic performance, huge inflow of immigrants, rising housing prices, much disappointment. That put the Conservatives ahead until Trump began to open his mouth.
So basically what they're telling you is that Canada, because if you want to project what the United States of America would have been like had we not elected Trump as our president of the United States of America, Canada was a much more extreme version of what we were experiencing here in the United States of America. So their strategy amid a failing economy and continuing to tax their people over to oblivion, healthcare crisis, because even though they have free healthcare for all, nobody have primary care physicians. And a lot of these different states, or not even states, let's just say provinces, a lot of different provinces and a lot of these places, it's not incentivized for you to have a independent healthcare provider that can do preventative healthcare for you so that you don't end up in the hospital. So although you had free healthcare for all, what's happened is people have been overtaxed in order to support it, while at the same time their economy is collapsing and they have no primary care providers. So people would just go to the hospital for emergencies, and then you would have these extremely long wait times. And people were complaining about Canada's healthcare system because it did not work and it was not productive. And even though it was being marketed over here that everybody had free healthcare over in Canada, first of all, nothing is free, so the taxpayers are the ones that's going to pay for it. Secondly, it wasn't working for the people because they couldn't do preventative maintenance. Third, the people were suffering. And fourth, the economy was collapsing. And so what Canada decided to do was take their liberal policies and triple down. They decided that they wanted to have more illegal migrants or immigration into the country while at the same time eroding their base. And that gave rise to a conservative party. This is the reason why we were saying that Justin Trudeau was trash. This is the reason why he was flying over here and Trump was saying, yeah, man, we just need to go ahead and make Canada the 51st state and just call it a day. Shout out to Governor Justin Trudeau. It was difficult. Very, 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 very difficult. Very difficult. I mean, outside of the beer and the hockey, people in Canada were suffering. Trust me, I know. Those are our neighbors. I talk to some of them from time to time to better understand exactly what's happening in the economy. And so the Conservative Party was leading by a wide margin. When Mark Carney came in to the demise of Justin Trudeau, who is the former Canadian Prime Minister, who just recently stepped down amidst this whole tariff war, Mark Carney came in and he is an even more liberal, more of what Justin Trudeau was. And you know what the unfortunate part about this situation is? Is that the minute that you get a little bit of change, but a person becomes even more liberal, the people don't learn from their mistakes. And you know what they did? They reelected the same type of person. They reelected the same type of person. Sounds familiar? We almost got it wrong. We almost found ourselves following the 92% over into the polls. We almost found ourselves allowing for these liberals to determine and dictate what we do, and the possibility of what if, and the dreams and the aspirations of such. I mean, so much so that Justin Trudeau actually said that he thought that Kamala Harris should become president of the United States of America. I wonder why.
Talk about that. What happened after Trump, as you put it, Trump opened his mouth?
Well, Canada and the United States have a $1 trillion trading relationship. Obviously, there are always frictions, and they always have to be resolved. And traditionally, they've been resolved through negotiation, amicably, and in the context of a relationship that's also about security, policing, environmental. It's an excellent relationship almost all the time. Trump began to put demands on Canada, and they were.
Somebody said, people are scared. They think they will have another Trump. I have tons of family in Canada. Okay, well, then keep doing what you have been doing. I think that will work out beautifully for you guys. Listen, keep doing the thing that y'all been doing for the last 10 years that have driven you guys into economic collapse and to have an overwhelming majority of people migrating and trying to get migrants into the country. Go ahead, do what you do, overtax the people, and then see how that plays out for y'all.
They weren't rational demands. And that has, of course, rallied Canadian opinion to the flag and made Canadians look around to say, which politician seems least like Donald Trump? And that's the guy we're going to back.
Tell us about the two leaders who are likely to be, one of them will be the new prime minister, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre.
The Conservative Party leader has been leader for a while. He's a very dynamic House of Commons performer. He had made his mark on the issue, above all, of housing prices. And he'd appealed strongly to younger voters who have been priced out of housing markets, especially in Vancouver and Toronto. And
does this sound familiar, you guys? Does this sound familiar? So the Conservative Party leader had been appealing to a younger demographic. They then say that as this guy was appealing to a younger demographic, now the people have switched because they were scared of the Conservative Party leader that actually was going to probably solve the majority of what the problems were inside of Canada. Let's let this play out, and then we're going to go over into Trump having the biggest impact on the election.
And that was the core of his message. Economic change, accelerate economic growth, bring down housing prices so you can start a family. But the Conservatives also have a minority within the Conservative Party that has responded to some Trump-like themes. And so Canadians sense the Conservatives weren't as anti-Trump as Canadian voters were at a time when Trump was saying, I want to destroy Canada. And so Mark Carney, who's a banker who's never run for any office before, stepped in as the clean face of the Liberals, replaced Justin Trudeau, and is saying, I will stand up to Trump, and I will deliver a kind of more economic nationalism of a Canadian variety. Someone is going to say no to Trump, and they're not so sure that the Conservatives would say no to everything.
When Americans hear liberal and conservative, they think they're analogous to the Democrats and Republicans. Is that right?
That's not at all right. So the Liberal Party of Canada is the most effective political organization in the democratic world. They've held out of the past 100 years, they are all about winning. They are very unlike the Democrats. And there is not a thing they stand for that they wouldn't turn it upside down if it helped them win votes. The Conservative Party is a much more regionally based party. It's a much more fractious party. And it's got a higher floor of supporters, but a lower ceiling. And it's a much less ideological party than the American Republicans. So the Liberals, much more ruthless than the Democrats. The Conservatives, much less ideological than the Republicans. That's why you can have such a big movement of votes, because it's not that polarized a country, not that ideological a party system.
We've had record early voting in Canada. Does that reflect voter interest?
It reflects two things. First, the turnout is going to be high. There's also been a trend in Canada for the vote to splinter into smaller parties, regional parties, Green parties, the left-wing NDP. This election looks like to be a reconcentration in the two big parties, Liberals.
So basically, they're the same as what we've been dealing with over here in the United States of America, but instead they decided that they wanted to vote in Biden for a second term. Actually, even better, they decided that they wanted to vote in Kamala Harris because Mark Carney is the successor to Justin Trudeau. So right now, as of the recording of this, they are saying that the Liberal Party is actually the one that is leading in the polls, but the polls could be a little bit more misconstrued than possible. Let's get over into this other part of the video.
See that in the polling, that the number one issue most Canadian voters say that they're focusing on in the short term is, the US relationship.
But isn't the fact that that Trump threat is overshadowing a productivity crisis that both of the leaders don't have much room to fix fiscally?
Well, that's right. And the economy is in a very difficult spot in Canada, and it could become even more so because while Canada has some cars, because it's a big exporter to the US of products the US needs, it's also really the kind of sole market for a lot of Canadian products. And so only set to become even more complicated.
Natwan, what is his name? Natwan Salary says the downside I have seen is having so many parties is that the power is not consolidated enough to get anything done. Well, what will usually happen in that type of situation, which these new parties are a good thing, right? So when you see the Green Party, Libertarians, Independents, all of that stuff over here in the United States of America, you see some of those issues start to be adopted by. So those parties are not there so that they can actually win the election. They never do. They never do. They're there to influence how other parties actually govern once they become elected, or to adopt certain issues from those parties that they think more closely align with whatever it is that they do, right? So you may see a Jill Stein, and one of the things that Jill Stein actually educated Charlemagne and everybody else on the Breakfast Club about was she helped them to understand that a lot of the same issues that liberals or conservatives or Republicans or Democrats argue about today were a part of what it is that that party in particular had been championing for a long time. So often at times you'll see these much larger Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal parties be influenced by what is happening in these individual parties. All right. They don't necessarily win elections, but they absolutely 100% change the trajectory of whether or not you have people that are on the fence that I would more or less say are independents, even though they may be subscribed to a specific party. Look at what you've seen from RFK Jr. RFK Jr. had a huge impact, I believe, in his past election. And one of the things that I think that helped Donald Trump win and sweep every single swing state, along with Tulsi Gabbard, defecting over from the Democrat Party because she was one of the people that absolutely destroyed Kamala Harris in her first go around to try to run for president of the United States of America, was the fact that there were several people that switched parties and said that they wanted to actually be a part of Donald Trump's campaign, right? So I think that a lot of these parties are basically there to be feeders as well as impact or sway specific voters one way or another, depending on whatever it is that they're more closely aligned with. So I don't think that the parties necessarily need to be consolidated. I think that that's where you start to see corruption. When you see one party or only a two-party system have all the power and no impact, nothing else is influencing them, then that could absolutely bring, I think, absolute corruption. And that's why we need the Department of Government Efficiency. That's why we see fraud, waste, and abuse. That's why we see a lot of this military industrial complex controlling what's happening with these wars. I think that's when you start to see a lot of stealing, a lot of dealing. You start to see a lot of people doing things that they really, I mean, politics is already corrupt, but I think that it goes even more left. That's just my personal opinion.
And so the economic picture is very difficult. The question is, do voters in the minute when they stand there to cast their ballot today say, I'm going to vote on sort of an emotional level really about the US relationship, or I'm going to vote on those underlying long-term structural economic issues, including housing as well, which is a big one for a lot of people in Canada, and who's best placed to fix all of that. You know, the Conservatives have campaigned on the idea also that Mark Carney, while he has moved to separate himself from Justin Trudeau, is still really sort of Trudeau in Carney clothing in a way, that he's not fundamentally that different, and that his economic policies would echo Justin Trudeau. And of course, Trudeau's economic policies were not particularly popular at the time that he stepped aside.
The polls have, as you've mentioned, shifted in favour of the Liberal Party. Where might we be looking for surprises as we see the results come in later?
Well, it's interesting because the very last poll that we've seen has shown a little bit of slippage again for Carney. And the question is, does he get enough of the seats to form a government in his own right? Or are we headed potentially for another minority government in Canada? I mean, the strongholds traditionally for the Liberals, Quebec, Ontario, seem to be where they are going into the vote. The question in a way is also about Western Canada, which is the traditional stronghold for the Conservatives. And
I think that it's going to be a really close election. We've never actually even cared about Canadian elections until this election, and that actually shows you how much power that Trump has. And so we're going to get into that shortly. But I'll keep you guys informed on what's happening over there in Canada.